Welcome to Into the Arms of Morpheus podcast, a quiet story from history. Tonight, the night the stars were new. Close your eyes. You are not here anymore. You are somewhere older. Much older, before maps, before names, before any of this. A time when the Pacific Ocean had been here for millions of years, and human beings had been crossing parts of it for thousands. But the far corner of it, the southern part, the deep south, the cold blue water below the tropics, had never yet seen a person. There is only ocean. In every direction, as far as you can imagine, there is nothing but water, dark and deep and very old. Not the rough grey water of the North Atlantic. This is the Pacific, a different kind of ocean entirely, larger than all the land on earth put together, warmer in the north, colder in the south, but everywhere enormous, everywhere patient, everywhere ancient in a way that other things are not, because it has been here in some form since before the continents were in their current positions, since before much of what we know about the world existed. Above the water, the whole sky, filled with more stars than you have ever seen in a city, more than you have seen on the clearest night you can remember on land. The sky at sea, away from any shore, in the southern Pacific, on a clear night with no moon, is one of the most extraordinary things a person can look at. The stars are not scattered, they are everywhere. The Milky Way is not a faint suggestion, it is a structure. A broad, dense band of light crossing the sky from one horizon to the other, bright enough to cast a shadow if you were looking for it. Individual stars are hard and bright, not the soft points of light that city air softens and dims, but sharp and clear and present in a way that makes them seem closer, as though the dark between you and them is not as great as you know it to be. The Pacific Ocean is the largest thing on the surface of the earth. It covers more of the planet than all the land put together. If you took every continent and laid them side by side, and then laid them on the Pacific, you would not cover it. You would still have ocean left over on every side. It is not a sea. It is not a stretch of water between two places. It is a world of its own, vast and still and patient, and almost entirely empty of anything except water and the creatures that have evolved to live in it. This is the Pacific Ocean. And somewhere out on that water, tonight, there is a canoe. It is not a small canoe. It is a waka horua, a double-hulled voyaging canoe built for exactly this, for crossing enormous distances of open ocean, for carrying families and supplies and the accumulated knowledge of a people from one island to the next, or from one island group to another, or in this case, from the known world into the unknown one. The design of the Waka Haurua had been developed over many generations of Pacific voyaging. 2 hulls, each one a complete canoe in its own right, lashed together with cross beams and a wide platform between them. The double hull gave stability in the open ocean swells. The platform gave space for people and cargo. A sail, woven from leaves or pandanus fibre, caught the wind and drove the whole vessel forward. It was a technology of extraordinary sophistication for its time, purpose-built for the kind of voyaging that no other civilization on Earth was attempting on this scale. On it, there are people, families, an extended group of people who have committed themselves to this crossing together. Men who know the sea, women who know how to manage stores and tend the very young and the sick, children who have grown up on islands and who understand water in the way that landlocked children understand fields. They have been at sea for many weeks. The crossing from eastern Polynesia to Aotearoa takes a very long time, longer than most journeys anyone in this era was making anywhere in the world, longer than a crossing of the Mediterranean, longer than a coastal voyage up the edge of any continent. Below the platform, in the hulls and in the space between them, they carry what they have brought. Food stores carefully managed, dried fish, dried fruit, cooked taro wrapped in leaves, fresh water in gourds and containers, seeds, cuttings of plants they intend to grow in whatever place they find, dogs, rats, which were a food source as much as a pest, carried deliberately. The materials needed to start a life, fish hooks and cordage, and tools made from stone and bone and shell. Everything they are bringing has been chosen. Nothing is accidental. The people who planned this voyage understood that they were going somewhere they had never been, to a place that might take weeks or months to reach, and that they would need to arrive with enough to survive until they could establish themselves. The loading of a voyaging canoe before a long crossing was an act of sustained, careful intelligence. Every item weighed against every other item, every necessity balanced against every want. They have nothing fixed to navigate by except the sky. No landmarks, no coastline visible, no reference point of any kind except what is above them. The stars, the sun, the moon, and the quality of light at different times of day, and the ocean itself, which to a skilled navigator is not an absence of information, but a source of it. The navigator knows the sky. Not in the way a person today might know the names of a few constellations, might be able to point out Orion or the Southern Cross on a clear night. The navigator knows the sky the way a person knows the rooms of a house they have lived in for 30 years. Completely, automatically, without needing to think. He knows which stars rise where on the eastern horizon at every time of year. He knows the arc each star follows across the sky through the night. He knows which stars set where on the western horizon and at what time. He carries all of this in his memory, in his body, as a kind of knowledge that does not require retrieval because it is always present. This knowledge was passed to him by the navigator who taught him, who received it from the navigator before that, in an unbroken chain of transmission going back many generations. It was not written down. There was no book. There was the knowledge itself, carried in human memory and in the practice of using it, passed from one person to the next by the only method that works for knowledge of this kind. By doing it together, year after year, until the apprentice knows it as well as the teacher. He knows the stars of the southern sky especially. Atutahi, what astronomers would later call Canopus, sits above the south celestial pole, so far south that it never sets below the southern horizon. It is always there, always in the same place relative to south, a fixed lantern in the sky that tells you which way south is, regardless of what time it is or what season. For a navigator heading south, this star is the most important thing in the sky. He knows Matariki, the small soft cluster that Western astronomy calls the Pleiades, whose rising in the pre-dawn sky marked the new year, the season of planting, the beginning of a new cycle of time. He knows the Milky Way and the specific stars within it. He knows the stars the way a musician knows a piece of music, not as a sequence of separate notes, but as a whole thing, held in the mind at once. Tonight he lies on the platform of the Waka Horua and looks up at all of it. He is reading the sky, confirming the course, making the small adjustments that will be needed as the night progresses. South. They are heading south. He also reads the ocean. The Pacific, for all its vastness, is not without pattern. There are currents that flow in the same directions year after year, predictable enough to be navigated by, reliable enough to be incorporated into a mental map of the ocean. There are swells, long rolling waves that travel thousands of miles from the storms that generated them, arriving at any given point in the ocean from a consistent direction that changes only slowly with the seasons. An experienced navigator can feel these swells through the hull of the canoe, even when the surface of the ocean seems calm. He can feel the angle at which the swell meets the hull, and from that angle He can infer his direction, even at night, even when the stars are obscured. The ocean also carries information in its colour, its temperature, the creatures that live in different parts of it. Certain birds live and feed in certain zones of ocean and are not found outside them. The presence of specific birds tells you where you are. Floating vegetation of particular kinds indicates specific currents. The behaviour of the swells changes near land. They reflect off coasts and islands, and the reflections can be felt in the motion of the hull, if you know how to read them. The navigator lay on the platform and felt all of this. The angle of the swell against the hull, the slight lift of a cross swell arriving from a different direction, carrying information about land or storm or current somewhere far away. The temperature of the air, which was changing, becoming cooler as they moved south, the tropical warmth of eastern Polynesia giving way to something different, the stars wheeling overhead with the slow certainty of things that do not change. He made small, careful adjustments, a little this way, a little that way, speaking quietly to the person at the steering paddle, holding a line that existed only in his memory and his reading of the sky and the sea, a line that had no physical marker, that was invisible to everyone except him, but that was as real as any road and more reliable than most. The ocean is not featureless. To someone who does not know it, it appears featureless. Water in every direction, nothing to distinguish one part from another. But the ocean has texture and direction and information in it for those who know how to read it. The navigator was reading it continuously, without stopping, the way a skilled driver reads a road, not consciously, not with deliberate attention to each individual piece of information, but with the whole body engaged, the information processed below the level of thought and converted into action. South. They were heading south. We do not know exactly when the first people arrived in Aotearoa. Scholars have worked on this question for a long time. The evidence shifts as new methods are developed. The study of ancient charcoal, of pollen preserved in lake sediments, of the DNA of people living today, traced back through generations. The picture has sharpened slowly over decades of careful work. The current best understanding places the first arrivals in the late 1200s, perhaps 1280, perhaps a little earlier or a little later. In the scale of Pacific history, this is very recent. Aotearoa was one of the last places on Earth that human beings reached. We know where they came from: Eastern Polynesia, the island groups that today we call the Cook Islands, the Society Islands, the general region where Tahiti sits warm and green in the middle of the Pacific. These were a people who had already done extraordinary things. They had populated the Pacific from west to east over thousands of years, island group by island group, moving into the unknown and finding what was there and settling it and building lives. And then, some generations later, moving on again. They had found Hawaii, far to the north, a voyage of more than 3,000 kilometers across open ocean with no landmarks, navigated entirely by sky and sea. They had reached Easter Island, one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth. They had, some evidence suggests, made contact with South America. The Pacific, which looks on a map like an enormous empty space, was to these people a world they understood and moved through with skill. Not an obstacle, a home. A network of places connected by sea routes that they knew and that they navigated by knowledge held in the minds and bodies of their navigators. They came to Aotearoa not by a single lucky accident, but as the culmination of a process, the last great discovery of the last great voyaging culture, finding the last large landmass that no human being had ever seen. Try to imagine the night they first saw it. They had been at sea for many weeks. The routine of the crossing had long since settled into the body. The watch rotations, the careful distribution of food and water, the daily observation of the sky. The children had grown accustomed to the motion of the water, had stopped noticing it the way children stop noticing the background conditions of their lives once those conditions are simply the way things are. The adults had found the particular calm of a long voyage well underway, past the anxious beginning, not yet within reach of the end, simply in the passage itself. The birds had already been telling them something. Certain birds, the kinds that feed at sea during the day but return to land to roost at night, had been visible for a day or more, flying in a consistent direction, their wings unhurried, always the same bearing. A navigator who knew his birds could estimate distance from land by the species and the behavior of what he saw. These men knew their birds. The birds were saying, "Land is there, and not too far." And then there was a smell, something green and wet and alive, completely different from the clean salt emptiness of open ocean that had been in the air for weeks. The smell of vegetation warming in the sun, of soil, of fresh water meeting the sea and changing it slightly where they joined. This smell, after long weeks of clean salt air, is one of the most unmistakable things a person returning from sea can experience. The first smell of land. The first indication that the world has an edge again, that there is solid ground somewhere nearby. And then, as the light was going, someone noticed a shape on the western horizon that did not move the way clouds move. A darkness that persisted. A solidity in the sky where sky alone should have been. Aotearoa, New Zealand. The last large landmass on Earth to be found by human beings. What they found was unlike anywhere they had ever been. The islands they came from were beautiful, warm, green, surrounded by the Pacific, the coconut palms and the breadfruit and the shallow lagoons. But they were small. The largest of the Society Islands is not very large. You can walk across it in a day. You can walk around it in a few days. The scale of things is the scale of an island, contained, comprehensible, with an edge that can be reached and identified. Aotearoa was enormous. Compared to anything they had known, it was almost impossible to understand at first. The North Island alone, the warmer, lower island where the first settlements took hold, is larger than all of the Society Islands combined, many times over. And the South Island, which they would explore later, was larger still, and colder, and stranger. The great mountains in its spine holding snow through the summer, the rivers running with glacial cold, the forests covering everything that the mountains did not. This land had been separate from the rest of the world for a very long time, longer than we can easily imagine, long enough that the birds here had evolved in the complete absence of land mammals. No rats, no cats, no dogs, nothing that preyed on birds from the ground. Birds had filled every ecological role that mammals fill elsewhere. Some had grown very large, feeding on the abundant plant life of the forest floor. Some had kept their wings, but forgotten their original purpose, evolving into something between a bird and a flightless creature. All of them were unafraid of anything, because fear of ground predators is learned, and they had had nothing to learn it from. The moa moved through the forest in groups, large, unhurried, feeding on leaves and berries and roots. They had no instinct to flee. They simply continued what they were doing when people appeared among them, as calm as cattle in a field that has never seen a stranger. The first people ashore must have stood very still, just listening. The forest was full of sound. The tui with its complex song, part liquid and part mechanical, pouring from the tree canopy. The bellbird, whose call early visitors would later compare to the sound of glass bells struck gently. The kokako, the huya, dozens of species that had evolved their voices in isolation and produced something the arriving people had never heard before. A forest that sang. They built shelters first. Then they began to move through the land, learning its shape. They took their canoes along the coastlines, exploring the bays and inlets and river mouths, mapping in memory what they found. They gave names to everything they encountered, names that carried information, encoding what each place offered and what it required, how to find it again, what to expect there in different seasons. A bay where fish were plentiful in summer, a river mouth where fresh water was reliable through the dry months, a headland that marked the turning point between two kinds of coast. The naming of a landscape is a form of occupation. It claims a place not by force, but by attention. The sustained, careful, accumulating attention of people learning to live somewhere new. The names the first people gave to Aotearoa remain, many of them, the names those places bear today, embedded in the landscape like the roots of old trees. They planted the kumara they had brought across the Pacific, the sweet potato that needed careful cultivation in a climate cooler than what it was adapted to. They found the right soils and the right aspect in the warmer north, built the earth mounds that conserved heat, learned the growing seasons of a place quite different from anywhere in Polynesia. The plant needed coaxing. It needed attention and knowledge, and the willingness to adapt what was known to what was found. It worked. And over the generations, not quickly, not in a single lifetime, but over the slow accumulation of many generations of people living in a place and learning it fully, something entirely new came into being. A culture that carried everything its founders had brought. The language, which was a form of Polynesian that would develop in this place until it was its own complete thing. The stories, which explained the world and held the values of the people. The deep navigational knowledge of the sea and the stars that had made the crossing possible, and that carried also what this land gave, the greenstone of the South Island rivers, valued for its hardness and its beauty, the great kauri trees of the north, from whose timber vessels could be built that dwarfed any island canoe, the specific character of a country that was cool and wet and mountainous, and entirely unlike any island. They called themselves Maori, which simply means ordinary, real, of this place. Not explorers anymore, not voyagers passing through, people of a land. There is a whakatauki, a proverb passed down through many generations. He aha te mea nui o te ao. What is the greatest thing in the world? He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is people. It is people. It is people. The same stars are there tonight, the ones the navigator used on that long crossing. At Tutahi, sitting quietly in its fixed place above the south, exactly where it has always been, where it will always be. Matariki, small and soft, waiting for the season when it will rise before dawn and mark the turning of the year. The long pale wash of the Milky Way moving slowly across the dark. And somewhere beneath all of that, the ocean is moving. The same ocean, the same patient, enormous, ancient Pacific that carried the Waka Hurua south many centuries ago, and that carries everything placed on it with the same indifference, the same patience, the same deep cold and enormous dark. As it was then, as it is now. You have drifted a long way tonight, across the water, through the dark. The stars are keeping watch. You don't have to. Rest now and drift slowly into the arms of Morpheus.